All right, guys, welcome to Axis and Allies, the Garrison. This is Dtroy once again coming to you from Rochelle Park, New Jersey. And today I'm going to be talking to you about magnetized magnetic carriers. Okay, in front of you, we have my recently painted but yet not finished U.S. naval carrier collection. Most of these are U.S. early war naval carriers, of which most of them were sunk by the Japanese by 1942, 1943. Okay, it's a combination of also a few Essex class carriers that saw action until the very end of the war. Okay, by the way, this is a Essex class. In any case, guys, I wanted to talk to you about how I came about with the idea of magnetizing my carriers and what I ultimately what the solution was in order to develop my own technique and what I did. Okay, so I was first exposed to magnetic carriers when I watched Sire Blood's video on how he went about magnetizing his own carriers. Okay, when I first saw his video in his channel, I was blown away. I thought it was a great innovation of how he went about magnetizing his carriers. And just to give you a brief synopsis on how he did it, what Sire did was that he basically took magnetized primer paint and painted the bottom end of his game pieces of his airplanes. Once having done so, he would then take magnetic tape, cut them into little small slivers of tape, and adhere them to the surface of his carriers. Okay, so then he would just simply land his carriers, his fighters or his airplanes on top of the magnets or the magnetic tape that he had embedded on the flat tops. Okay, so it was a technique that just blew me away. I thought it was something interesting and something that I believed was worth looking into further. Having said that, though, I wasn't quite sure if magnetizing my carriers using that specific technique was what I actually wanted for myself. So I continued brainstorming and doing research, and I happened to have run into Dirk Kunstler's YouTube channel, where he has an episode where he goes about explaining how he went about magnetizing his carriers. So what he did was that he came up with an ingenious idea on how to magnetizing his carriers. And what he did was that he embedded in the bottom of his carriers little or small magnets on the bottom end of his ships, of his carriers. Then he would take his game pieces, his airplanes, and embed on the fuselage of his airplanes or game pieces small magnets as well. He would then simply land them, and boom, you would have a magnetized carrier. Okay, very interesting. I really like this idea, and I was contemplating on adapting or adopting this particular technique as my own. Okay, borrowing Dirk Kunstler's technique, of course. So I went ahead and actually made this. I actually went ahead and magnetized this carrier, and I thought for a while that this was going to be the way I would be magnetizing my carriers. However, I wasn't quite sure if I was still if using this technique was what I wanted. So I started once again to brainstorm, and I gave Sire Blood a phone call a couple of weeks ago, and I asked him if it was possible to paint over a magnetized primer paint. Okay, because I wasn't sure that if I were to apply a layer of magnetized paint or primer and then apply a layer of paint over that, I wasn't sure if the primer will retain its magnetic properties. So I was afraid if it wouldn't work. So I gave him a call. I gave Sire a call, and he basically told me that he wasn't sure. And he said, "Hey, experiment. You have nothing to lose. Go ahead." So that's exactly what I did. So I started experimenting, and I went ahead, bought myself a can of magnetic primer paint and started painting my collection of U.S. naval carriers. Okay, and of course, what you're seeing in front of you is the result, the final product of my efforts. Okay, it's not a final product because I'm not yet finished painting this naval collection. However, as I'm going to show you now, this is a magnetized carrier using magnetic paint. By the most part, the carrier is already finished. You can see I just have a couple of more details in order to complete the game piece itself, but you'll see that there are no magnets embedded on the hull of the ship. What keeps the airplanes attached to the flat top is the magnetic paint, which works wonderfully well considering that there's paint on top of it. Okay, so as you can see, it could take I could shake it, somewhat rigorously, and it will not, the airplanes will just not fall. I got to really shake this thing. Okay, so I was very surprised and pleasantly surprised that the magnetic properties of the magnetic primer do not diminish when you paint over them. Okay, so I was very happy with the final product. Once again, I'm not finished with this naval collection, but I couldn't wait to show you guys, and I guess that's the reason why I went ahead and made this video anyway, because I just couldn't wait to show you and basically show off what we can do with magnetic primer paint. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to show you a video of actually a couple of videos that I pasted together, that I edited together, showing you what the process was and how it is that I went about developing this technique. Okay, so of course, I give credit to Sire Blood, I give credit to Dirk Kunstler. They were the guys that were ahead of me, and I borrowed, I borrowed the best of the best of each world. I borrowed the magnetic primer paint concept from Sire, and the magnets from Dirk Kunstler. Okay, so that's about it. Okay, so I'm just going to show you the next coming a segment of this episode, how it is that, or the process of how I paint, primed, painted, and detailed these game pieces. Okay, so just before I let you guys go, just a couple of shout outs to G.I. Joe and Cronus. These guys are new YouTubers who I believe are making inroads into our community, and I congratulate them in their efforts to joining us, and I look forward to seeing more of their content. Okay, so guys, keep up the good work, and I look forward to seeing more of your content. Okay, guys, let me know what you guys think. What you want to do here is dip your brush in magnetic primer, okay, just slightly, and then apply long strokes, okay, gently on the surface of the flat top. Okay, you want to make sure that the paint or the primer is evenly spreads out on the surface of the flat top. And the reason why I emphasize that is because this magnetic primer is very thick. Okay, it easily clumps up, and if you're not evenly spreading it out, you'll have little lumps on the surface, and that is something that you don't want on your game piece. That's why you have to apply long strokes, smoothing out the paint or the primer on the surface of the carrier. Okay, now let's try another one. Here you have the USS Yorktown. Again, this is the early war version of the aircraft carrier, because we know that the Yorktown was sunk, but sometime during the war, the U.S. Navy actually built a second Yorktown. I believe the second Yorktown was an Essex class carrier. Okay, so again, I'm going to go ahead and apply the primer. Okay, as the one before, as the Wasp, this This is actually the application number 6. I've already applied 5 layers of magnetic primer on this game piece. Okay, again, long, smooth strokes. You want the primer to evenly settle on the surface of the flat top. You can't allow it to clump up. If it does, then it's going to look pretty crappy. All right, now let's wait for it to dry. Okay, all right, let's pick up this Essex class. This is already has had 6 applications. As far as I can tell, the surface of the flat top looks pretty smooth, and it should take to the paint well. Okay, now having yet gotten there, I will show you. I will paint a carrier completely. This way I can show you how the end product will look like and show off the magnetic properties of the magnetic primer that I utilized, which of course is, I first got the idea from Sired Blood. Okay, this is a Essex class carrier. Okay. All right, guys. All right, the magnetic paint that actually, it's not a magnetic paint. Let me make that correction. Okay, the substance that I'm using is actually a magnetic primer. Okay, what you first have to do when using this primer, is to first prepare your game piece by applying a coat of primer, regular primer paint, which will then, once it dries, you will be able to apply the magnetic primer paint or primer on the surface. The reason is that the magnetic primer doesn't take to an unpainted surface that easily. At least, I found it a little bit difficult. So I found that it was a lot easier when I will prime the game piece first, then apply the primer, and then after the primer, the final paint, so that you could detail your game piece. That's the technique that I'm using right now. Okay, so primer first, magnetic primer second stage or second step, and finally the third step is the actual paint job or the paint for detailing. Okay, now this magnetic primer, you can find that at any hardware store. I got this one particular at the Home Depot. It cost me $20. The substance is actually very, very thick. Okay, it's black, very thick. So what I suggest is that you stir the primer until it becomes fluid, until the entirety of the material inside the primer is totally dissolved in the paint. Okay, so that's something you first have to do, and you have to do that so that the magnetic properties of the primer can totally adhere to your game piece. All right, so if you just open up the can and just barely stir the primer, the magnetic properties are not going to be as effective when you apply the primer on the game piece. So I suggest that you take the time. I think I stirred this thing for like about 20 minutes before I applied the primer to the miniature itself. All right, guys, so I finally completed applying the 5 layers, actually the 6 layers of magnetic primer on my US carriers. The magnetic primer has dried. Okay, so they're now ready to be painted with the paint that I'm going to apply. The paint that I'm going to use is an acrylic craft paint. It's feather gray, okay, which is what I'm going to be using for my US carriers for the flat tops. Okay, so it's The brand is My Studio Feather Gray Acrylic Craft Paint. Okay. All right. So let me start. As you can see, I've already done a few of them. I've applied the first coating on the surface of the flat tops. Okay. And the idea is for the final look to be like this. Okay. Now this carrier, I used Dirk Kunstler's magnetizing technique of drilling two small holes on the bottom of the game piece or the miniature, and then using that in order as the two magnets in order to adhere your aircraft, your fighters. Okay, that's Dirk Kunstler's technique. I'm utilizing another technique that I've developed. Of course, I've been heavily influenced by Sired Blood and Dirk Kunstler himself. Okay, so I'm not taking credit for their developments in regards to magnetizing your carriers. Okay, so let me go ahead and here I have the USS Lexington. It's a early war U.S. naval carrier, and I'm going to start applying the paint, which is the color is feather gray. Okay, so long streaks. And of course, this is going to be the first layer, and I'm still experimenting because I really don't know how the paint will affect the magnetic properties of the magnetic primer. So I have to find out. I'm going to see what the end result will be. I hope that the paint will not affect the magnetic properties of the primer. And if it does, I just hope that it's minimal. Okay. Of course, that's my daughter in the background. I'm babysitting. She's here watching her favorite cartoon, Peppa Pig. So that's the background noise you're hearing. Okay, so always remember, guys, when you're painting your flat tops, try to use long strokes, okay? And make sure that your paint is spread out evenly across the surface of the game piece. All right, that's about ready. Again, this is the first application. All right. Okay, here we have, let me try this one. This is the USS Ranger. Hey, Mama. That's my daughter saying hello to me. All right, so here we go. This carrier is a small carrier that's a little bit awkward to paint. Okay, let me see. Hold on. There we go. All right. I just received a series of text messages from John Brown where he showcases to me or shows me his newly painted German infantry units with an interesting color scheme that he developed. John is a very talented individual. I like what he does. I like his ideas. He's influencing me heavily. I know that some guys, when they paint their game pieces, they like to be historically accurate. I guess there are two schools of thought. You have your guys that like to have pieces that are historically accurate. Then you have guys that paint their game pieces with accuracy not being an objective. I initially was one of those. At first, when I first started painting, I was one of those that was not into accuracy. Now I am. I like to be historically accurate. But lately, when I realized that when you're very strict with accuracy, with being historically accurate, you kind of handcuff yourself. You're very limited as far as to the color schemes that you can use. So recently, John has influenced me, and I've been seeing what he's been doing, and I kind of like the idea of not being so strict. So, in a way, it's okay to experiment and try new ideas as long as they follow a certain parameter of historical accuracy. I guess you should be willing, or you should have the capacity to try new ideas and new color schemes. All right, so again, I think this one is pretty much done. At least the first application is complete. Guys, I apologize. Unfortunately, through the editing process, I lost a good number of my videos that I recorded while I painted and magnetized my carriers. So I hope that the videos that you did see, that they are helpful enough, assuming that you choose to paint and magnetize your own carriers. Okay, just to give you an idea, the carriers that I purchased from Shapeways, and it was from a designer called Ebard. Okay, this specific collection that I bought about 3 years ago. It was back and forth with Ebard because I wasn't exactly sure what the right scales were. I ordered some sizes that were either too small or too large, but we finally figured it out. And I guess that for Axis and Allies purposes, the right scale that you want to use is the 1/4000th scale. Okay, so 1/4000th is what you need. That I believe is the right size for Axis and Allies that are comparable with the OOB pieces that come included with the box, okay, with the game. Okay, so Ebard is the designer you want to reach out to. He's excellent, very helpful. I know that G.I. Joe has been back and forth with him, and he's also found him to be very helpful, especially with his city markers that he's currently using, that he wants to include in his own game table that I believe he's in the process of building. Okay, so once again, shout out to my buddy Ebard and to Kronos. These are guys that have great content, and you know, I highly suggest that if you guys haven't subscribed to them, that you give them a subscription. Okay, guys, once again, thanks for watching, and as always, hope that you come back and that you enjoyed the videos. Okay. And by the way, don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to hunker down and play. Until next time, guys.